welcome back to the Mr. Excel podcast. I'm Bill Jelen. We're still talking about pivot tables. As you figured out, pivot tables are my favorite feature in all of Excel. There's nothing more powerful than a pivot table. You know, they were actually invented by a guy named Pito Salas. Pito worked at Lotus in the Advanced Technology Group back in the 80s, and this was actually sort of a Lotus invention, but Lotus never put this in Lotus 123. They made it be a separate product called Lotus Improv. Well, in those spreadsheet wars in the 90s, Microsoft basically took the concept and added it to Excel as a pivot table. Very, very powerful thing. Well, today in pivot tables, we need to talk about one sort of caveat. Pivot tables, as I've discussed, will take 5,000 or 50,000 rows of transactional data and produce a quick summary report. This particular pivot table has totals by product and region. Now, when we think about Excel, usually we change one number and the entire workbook recalculates, but pivot tables don't do that. The reason that they don't is that when we start to create a pivot table, it takes all of the transactional data and it loads it into memory as a pivot cache. The pivot cache allows pivot tables to be created extremely quickly. We can move fields around and it recalculates instantly, but it never goes back to the original data on the worksheet unless we tell it to refresh. So for example, let me go back to the data. Right now we have 6,742,000. Let me add $10 million to the original data somewhere, just to prove that we really made the change. And I'll come back to our pivot table and you'll see that hitting F9 or anything like that does not change the pivot table. What we have to do is select one cell in the pivot table and then go to our pivot table toolbar and hit the red exclamation point, which is refresh data. That will force Excel to go back to the original data, pull it back into the pivot cache and redraw the pivot table. And there's the $10 million that we added. So something to be very careful of when you're creating a pivot table. Usually you can assume you change the data in Excel, it recalculates everywhere. Pivot tables don't automatically recalculate. You have to hit the red exclamation point to refresh your data. Hey, thanks for stopping by. We'll see you on Monday for another podcast from Mr. Excel.